What do you do when time does not heal your wound? Have you ever wondered why this hurt still lingers even after you forgive? And Jesus really healed trauma that time could not erase. So, our topic for this episode is about wounds that time cannot heal and how Jesus healed our emotional trauma. Hi, beloved. This is Doc Gilbert, and I am a Christian clinical counselor and psychologist. So, hello, welcome to our channel. If you are new here, my topic is all about Christian and mental health perspective. So, it's been my heart to really integrate Christian theology with the reality and the wisdom from psychology. And yeah, we're gonna talk about one of the most controversial topics, and I usually hear this, with the teleserye or the series here in the Filipinos. I usually hear it with Filipino families, with friends, with breakups, with the common talks about time can heal our wounds in the day-to-day basis here in the Philippines, whether among series, among family talks, with friendships, with breakups. And it's actually one of the most common myths, here in the Philippines. And, when we talk about stories of abuse, of dysfunction, of betrayal, whether it be about your partner or your boyfriend or girlfriend betrayed you, or maybe it's about a friend abandoning you or betraying you, or maybe it's about a family member that hurt or harm you. It's always a myth, to say that time can actually heal wounds. They usually say, just take it a time, you know, just allow time to heal the wounds. And it's usually also connected with, just forgive the person, forget the person, or forget what happened, and just pray, especially among Christians, and just bring it to Jesus, pray to God that it can heal your wound, and many times, even though there are a lot of advices, suggestions regarding that, specifically talking about time healing our wounds, still there would be bouts of sadness, anger, hurt, pain, anxiety, fear, and it usually comes up many times unexpectedly. Sometimes it comes up with new relationships, with friendships, with current adult connections. Many times it usually is being triggered by the same experience of abuse, abandonment, betrayal that the person experienced along the way. And you know these emotions do not necessarily mean that you are not healing. Yes, these emotions are actually signal that something is happening within us. Something is important that we need to look at. I usually say and discuss it with my clients: when you feel something, it's not your enemy. It's not bad, because these emotions are parts of you that wants to communicate something to you. Emotions are the manifestation of an underlying need, our need for safety, our need for protection, our need to be heard, to be loved, to be worthy, you know, and it wants to be seen, it wants to be heard, it wants to be felt. And many times, these emotions are also trying to bring up the inner child from within us. The inner child are actually parts of us that get stuck psychologically during an abuse or traumatic experience or an unmet need. Now, for example, when you were an 8-year-old kid, your father left you, then there is a part of you that got stuck psychologically, along with the emotions, beliefs, perceptions about the world, yourself, and with others. And that became an inner child. And later on, when a same abandonment happened during your adult relationship, these emotions that got stuck there when you were an 8-year-old kid would come up. Thus the inner child is coming up. And these emotions, it's both yes and no. Yes, you still need healing. And no, it does not mean you're not healing. So it's always a package of both. Okay, but to think about our wounds, emotions are always connected to it. It's a normal manifestation, reaction from a wound. And yeah, and we need to look into it. We need to talk about it and be aware, what does this wound wants to communicate to us. And it's not about time not giving healing to these wounds. Time is actually a very important ingredient to our healing. We need time. Like, for example, a physical wound, like an accident, like a motorcycle accident, you need a surgery. And after you going through an operation, this wound will take time to heal. And that is when time becomes a very important ingredient to our healing. So it depends on the level and degree of a wound that dictates what level and how much time is needed to heal a certain and specific wound. So time is an ingredient to healing, but it does not heal the wound. So why time doesn't heal our wounds? Okay, number one, trauma stays stored in our body. And it's very true with what Dr. Van der Kolk said in his book, The Body Keeps a Score, that our body actually stores up the unresolved trauma and grief in our lives. It stores up the emotions that are connected to this unresolved trauma and grief. And that because of that, if it is unresolved, even if time goes by, it is still stored up in our body. And according to the Adverse Childhood Experiences research, many of the illnesses, diseases, cancer, whatever sicknesses that are discovered that many people are suffering with, most of it are coming from undealt trauma. The abuse, the sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, and yes, our unconscious mind may have protected us from the reality of what we experience, from the pain and the intensity of the negative emotions, but our body could not lie. That's why there are a lot of physical manifestations such as psychosomatic manifestation, meaning maybe your whole body is normal, you do not have a specific sickness, but you feel a physical pain in your body as a manifestation of that anxiety or negative emotion. And but for some, they develop long-term diseases, different sicknesses, illnesses that they've tried to medicate from. And but for some, it became a mental disorder, a personality disorder. Yes, we may not really see and want to look at what really happened to us because it's too painful. But our body cannot lie. Our body has a wisdom, and it will manifest what our mind does not want to face. Okay? So at the same time, avoidance prevents healing. Yes, we have different psychological defenses that protect us from feeling this certain anger, pain, grief, sadness, connected to the traumatic experiences that we've experienced. But, it only goes deeper to the unconscious mind, which is in 90% of our mind. And these are the mind where many things about ourselves are unknown. We do not know yet. And many of the unresolved emotions are automatically goes to the unconscious mind. It is being pushed down towards that, but it will come up when there are certain triggers that connect to this unresolved trauma. So basically, it does not heal the wound. And of course, this undealt emotions, unresolved trauma, unchecked memories, unfaced realities and truths became and it will become a distorted belief. Belief that says, I am unworthy of love, I am unsafe, I am not lovable, I am insecure, I am a bad and evil person. All the shaming words that became our identity, all this negative critic that we've heard from our abusers, from the people who have hurt us, became an internalized dialogue that became our belief in ourselves, about God, about the world. And of course, because of that myth that time heals all wound, well, it brings many people into isolation. Rather than opening up, connecting to others by being authentic, it brought withdrawal, emotional isolation that hinders them to receive the necessary emotional support and intervention. And of course, it does not heal spiritual injuries. All this unresolved trauma, all these unhealed wounds became our own lenses on how we see God. If our fathers or mothers abandoned us, it became our lenses. It will become our lenses on how we see Heavenly Father. The same way how our biological parents abandoned us, the same way you're gonna see God as someone who would abandon you. And it's very common, especially with the stories I hear in counseling. I have this counseling where this person was abandoned by his father and mother. So it's not really shocking for me to hear that when he thinks that he sinned against God, God would abandon him. So it becomes our lenses, and it shows to us that time actually does not heal our wounds. So, what are the psychological roots of this lingering or staying pain in our body, in our emotional world? Of course, we have the attachment injuries. I know I've discussed that when a parent failed to bring and give a consistent, secure, and safe parenting towards a child, it creates what we call attachment injury or wound. And this kind of wound actually becomes a lifelong pattern. Once a child becomes an adult, this attachment style or the insecure attachment, such as the anxiety or anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, ambivalent attachment, it became a lifelong pattern of how this adult relates with others. And this emotional abandonment, this neglect, this inconsistency, of course, creates, different kinds of mental issues and even mental disorders. And that's why there's a lot of people who are suffering from mental health disorders are actually came from an inconsistent, toxic, unsafe parenting environment. These adults, and I've heard that many times in counseling, are coming from an unhealthy, toxic, unsafe relationship with their biological parents. And even when they are already an adult, this kind of pattern with these parents are still there, is still present. And of course, this unresolved grief that actually shows as sadness, numbness, anger, or difficulty, forming new connections, these negative emotions that are coming out in terms of relating with others are actually coming from the grief that must be grieved. Our losses that are not yet grieved will repeat and come out in our present relationship. For example, because a person, let's say a woman, did not grieve yet her loss of her boyfriend, then when she enters into another relationship, she would see this new boyfriend as the same with her ex, trying to see the expectation in that person. And of course, it becomes unfair for that person, becoming this object where this woman is trying to displace and project her unresolved grief. And of course, the childhood trauma, I know I've discussed many times that this becomes a core belief. Our unresolved trauma actually is forming a core belief that says, I am not lovable, I am unsafe, I am a bad person. Maybe I am not worthy of love, so people leave me. So these negative core beliefs are being formed coming from this traumatic experience. And thus, when there are triggers that come, for example, a friend that ignores you, and it became a trigger for you to remember, I'm worthy to be ignored. And it's coming from the trauma of being abandoned by your mother. So it it is becoming a core belief that is stuck, and it is becoming a template within our psyche. And of course, this betrayal wound affects our ability to trust others, ability to see the world as something that can be safe, something that can be trustworthy. And it leads us either, we will be hyper vigilant, or we will withdraw from our relationships. And of course, most importantly, it creates identity disruption. This traumatic and painful experiences hits and really attacks our worth as a person, our dignity, and which actually affects on how we make future relationships in the future, how we feel safe or unsafe, stable or unstable in our future relationships. And of course, this kind of experience affects our spirituality. And many times I've discussed that our early attachment experiences with our parents, even with significant others like relatives, siblings, it becomes our template, our lenses on how we see God. And this negative and toxic experiences actually leads to spiritual disconnection and even anger to God. And that's why there are people who proclaim themselves as atheists, and many from this kind of dynamic and point of view are actually rooted from many unresolved anger towards their biological parents that are being projected towards God. So it's very hard for us, from experiencing trauma, abuse, to really trust that God loves us. And that is a natural impact of trauma in our lives. And it's not something that can only be dealt with by time. Time would not heal this one. So, how Jesus heals our trauma beyond time? Of course, he uses safe relationships. And that's where attachment repair happens, when we get to find people who are accepting, present, compassionate, empathic, and genuine, even though they've witnessed our messiness, our darkness, our sinfulness, our wounds, our, tragic past, the things that we hate about ourselves. And still, this specific people accepts us, loves us, and still, embraces us for who we are, accepts us for who we really are. Then, it becomes a tangible expression of God, of Jesus in our lives. And that actually leads to the development of the earned secure attachment, meaning, yes, we may not grow in a healthy and secure environment growing up as a child, but through the relationships that we have, through the safe, genuine, authentic, and compassionate relationships, then we are developing secure and healthy attachment. And that is healing, this attachment injury. Second, uh, Jesus also heals our negative core beliefs with his truth, right? Yes, there are shameful messages that says that I am unlovable, I'm not worthy to be fought for, I am worthy to be abandoned. And through what Jesus did on the cross, revealed through His Word, through what He did 2,000 years ago, and it showed us that we are worthy of love, we are worth fighting for. And even though in our most messed up sinful state, someone which is God, who is God, chose to fight for us till death on the cross. And there are a lot of scriptures that validates our worth, our dignity, our identity, which are very far from what the trauma and shame messages are dictating us. Okay? So that's how God also uses scriptures to bring healing to us. And of course, Jesus also uses emotional honesty. This is a healthy processing of the buried and undealt negative emotions coming from our traumatic experiences. Jesus invites us to lament, to confess, to acknowledge, to really verbalize our anger, our sadness, our fears, our anxieties, the reality of what we've experienced, in a safe community, in a safe place, such as the therapy session, with your counselor or with your psychology, with your leader that is safe, with your safe group or accountability group, which is connected with how Jesus actually brings healings. Healing is through the community as a healing environment. So both, the emotional honesty and processing within the safe community actually brings healing to our deepest wounds. And of course, Jesus also used purpose and redemption. Our wounds, yes, it may have brought harm to us, but as we heal, we became whole. We became secure in our sense of self and identity. And that's when what God said in the scripture, how God is turning evil for good. It does not mean that God allowed trauma. Trauma and abuse are actually the results of those people's choices to harm, to do sin that brought harm to many people. But God is saying that He can turn something good from the evil done against us. And that's, where meaning and purpose and redemption happens. That it's when our wounds became a source of wisdom for many people. When our wounds became a source of healing, of strength, of support, of comfort to many people who have also experienced betrayal, trauma, abuse, and pain. And, this kind of purpose and meaning actually reduces symptoms. And it is really connected to the research, that says finding meaning, being grateful of the good things, seeing the reality, seeing the truth actually reduces and minimizes the negative mental health symptoms. So, yeah, yes, time does not heal our wounds. Our wounds experience healing through our hard work of facing that, through our openness and humility to allow Jesus to enter into our deepest wounds. It's our commitment that even though when it gets hard, when you want to give up, you persevere. You did not give up. You fight, continuously stand up, and you never give up. And that's also God's message for you, beloved. Do not give up and know that Jesus is with you. He is with you every step of your way, giving you the strength, the grace to persevere in this difficult and long, arduous process of healing. Okay? So yes, time does not heal wounds, but time becomes God's ingredient to tend to bring healing to our deepest wounds. So yun lang. And that's it. And if you have any comment, insights, topics that you want us to discuss, please do not hesitate to comment down below. And if you know someone who might want to hear this, please share this. And if you are new here, please do subscribe. And yeah, it's really been a good thing to share this with you. And I hope to meet you in our next episode. Hanggang sa muli!